We live in an old farmhouse that's been around for over 130 years. It has a lot of history, and not just the kind you read about in books. This house has its own stories. Stories that you can feel when you walk through the halls or sit quietly in a room. It wasn't even originally built here. It was brought upriver decades ago, piece by piece, and rebuilt on this land, about 100 yards from an old cemetery. You can't help but feel the weight of the past here. It's in the creaking floors, the thick wooden beams, and sometimes in things you can't quite explain. At first, living here felt like stepping back in time. The house has a certain charm, with its wide front porch, slanted ceilings, and narrow staircases. But it didn't take long before we started noticing odd things. It wasn't anything major at first, just small things that you could easily brush off. A drafty corner here, a strange noise there. But the longer we stayed, the more we realized that this house wasn't entirely ours. One of the first things I noticed was a figure. A man. I'd see him standing in the doorway of our bedroom, just out of the corner of my eye. It wasn't every night, and it wasn't always clear. But it happened often enough that I stopped questioning whether it was my imagination. He never moved or came closer. He just stood there, watching. I tried to ignore it, but it's hard to ignore something like that. Then there were the moments in the kitchen. Our sink faces a window, and I'd often stand there washing dishes or rinsing vegetables. Twice now, I felt someone leaning into me from behind, like they were watching over my shoulder. Both times, I spun around expecting to see my husband, only to find the kitchen empty. Once, I even shouted at him to quit messing with me, only to realize he was all the way at the other end of the house. That was the moment I stopped trying to explain things away. My husband has had his own experiences too. One night, he told me he'd seen a dark figure in the hallway. This one was different from the man in the bedroom. He described it as tall and wearing a long, dark coat. The figure didn't linger. It walked straight through the house as if it had somewhere to be and disappeared in the direction of the cemetery. My husband isn't the kind of person who spooks easily, but even he seemed uneasy when he talked about it. For a while, we both tried to laugh it off. It's just an old house, we'd say. Old houses make noise. Old houses have quirks. And honestly, none of it felt threatening. It was weird, sure, but it wasn't something we couldn't live with. Until things started happening in our bedroom. It began with a feeling. Late at night, after my husband had gone to the other room to watch TV, I'd feel the bed shift, like someone was sitting down on my side. It wasn't subtle either. It was enough to wake me up. At first, I thought it must be my husband coming back to bed, but when I turned to look, no one was there. This started happening more and more often. Every time, it was the same. The bed would dip, and I'd feel that familiar weight, as if someone was settling in beside me. But I was always alone. And then last night, it escalated. I was asleep when I felt a sharp poke on my leg. It startled me awake, and for a second, I thought maybe it was just a muscle twitch. But then it happened again, this time on my hip. It wasn't random. It felt deliberate, almost playful, like the way a child might poke you to get your attention. I sat up, my heart racing, but the room was completely still. The only sound was the faint hum of the TV from the other room. I tried to go back to sleep, but it was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I braced myself for another poke or for the bed to shift again. I'm exhausted, and I'm starting to feel like this thing, whatever it is, isn't just harmless curiosity. It's like it's trying to get a reaction, to let me know it's there. And the more I acknowledge it, the more it seems to happen. Over the past few weeks, I've started to pay closer attention to the patterns. The activity is always strongest at night, usually when I'm alone. The bedroom and kitchen seem to be the focal points, though the hallway near the cemetery also has a certain heaviness to it. I've even started noticing cold spots in the house, places where the temperature suddenly drops for no apparent reason. It's subtle, but it's there. I've thought about trying to cleanse the house or bring someone in to bless it, but part of me wonders if that would make things worse. What if whatever's here doesn't want to leave? What if it's tied to the cemetery or to the history of the house itself? There's so much we don't know about this place. Who lived here before us? What kind of lives did they lead? And why does it feel like some part of them never left? Despite everything, I can't say I feel completely afraid. There's definitely a sense of unease, but it's mixed with curiosity. It's like the house is alive, filled with memories and echoes of the past. I've started to think of it as sharing space with someone who's just lingering. But even so, I'm tired. The nights are the hardest, and the lack of sleep is starting to wear on me. I need to find a way to make peace with this, to reclaim the house as our own. For now, I'm taking it one day at a time. I've started keeping a journal of everything that happens, hoping to find some sort of pattern or explanation. Maybe this is just part of living in an old farmhouse near a cemetery. Or maybe it's something more. Either way, I'm determined to figure it out. After all, this is our home, and whoever's here with us, they need to understand that. We were a military family, which meant moving was just part of our lives. We didn't stay in one place for too long, so I got used to the idea of packing up, saying goodbye, and adjusting to a new house every couple of years. In total, I've lived in 14 different homes, but out of all those places, one house stood out. Not because it was particularly beautiful or memorable, but because it was haunting. I mean that literally. From the moment we set foot in that house, something felt wrong. There was this heavy, oppressive energy, like the air itself was thicker and darker. It wasn't something I could see or explain, but I could feel it. It pressed down on you, making it hard to breathe or relax. I'd never experienced anything like it before, and I hope I never do again. There were strange things about this house that I noticed right away. For starters, it always felt like I was being watched. Not in the way you might feel if someone's casually glancing your way, but in a much more intense and unsettling way. Like someone or something had its eyes fixed on you every second of every day. It didn't matter where I went in the house. That feeling followed me everywhere, but it was especially strong in two places: my parents' bathroom and my bedroom. I was about 10 or 11 years old at the time, and my brother was a few years older, around 15 or 16. Like most kids, we had chores, and one of those was cleaning the bathrooms. Normally, this wouldn't be a big deal, but neither of us could stand going into our parents' bathroom. We refused. It wasn't just messy or smelly or anything like that. It was the way it felt. The bathroom had too many mirrors, and no matter where you stood, you always felt like someone was standing right behind you watching. Even now, at 26, just thinking about that room gives me chills. Thankfully, my mom didn't force us to clean it. I think she sensed something was off too, even if she didn't say it out loud. But if my parents' bathroom was unsettling, my bedroom was downright terrifying. It was the worst room in the house for me. The second I stepped inside, I felt this overwhelming sense of dread, like the walls were closing in and someone was staring at me from every corner. I avoided spending time in there as much as possible. At night, I would hide under the covers to sleep because it was the only way I could feel even a little bit safe. I knew something was watching me, but I didn't dare look. Sometimes I'd hear whispers. They were faint and scattered, like multiple voices murmuring just out of reach. The whispers came from all around the room, and I could never make out what they were saying. To be honest, I didn't want to know. I just squeezed my eyes shut and tried to ignore them. The nights were the worst. The door to my bedroom would sway on its own, creaking softly. And my bed? It felt less like a place to sleep, and more like a table surrounded by people. The whispers would circle me, moving from one side of the bed to the other. It was as if invisible figures were having a conversation right there, hovering over me. I never saw anything, but the feeling of being surrounded was enough to keep me up most nights. I had a small box TV in my room, which was a bit of a luxury back then. It sat on top of a tall, heavy wooden dresser. One day, I was lying on the floor in front of the dresser, watching TV, when this awful image popped into my head. I imagined the entire dresser tipping over and crushing me. It was such a vivid thought that it made my stomach drop, but I brushed it off. The dresser was solid wood and incredibly heavy. There was no way it could just topple over, but then the handles on the drawers started to jiggle, and the dresser swayed slightly. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I got up and never laid in front of that dresser again. My brother and I both had our own unsettling experiences in that house. At night, we'd often hear footsteps echoing through the halls. They weren't faint either. They sounded like heavy boots, deliberately stomping from one end of the house to the other. A few times, we were convinced it must be a burglar. But every time we checked, we found nothing. The doors were locked, the windows shut. No one else was there. Over time, we started to accept that the house wasn't normal. My brother and I would exchange nervous glances, but didn't talk about it much. What was there to say? It wasn't like we could do anything about it. We just tried to coexist with whatever was there, counting down the days until we could leave. Looking back, I'm thankful that I never saw anything in that house. But the feelings were more than enough. The oppressive energy, the whispers, the footsteps, and the constant sense of being watched made it the most terrifying place I've ever lived. Even now, years later, I can't shake the memories. That house left a mark on me, one that I don't think will ever fully fade. To give you a better sense of just how deeply unsettling this house was, let me paint a clearer picture of the atmosphere. The house itself wasn't particularly old or creepy looking. It was a fairly standard suburban home, the kind of place you'd drive past without giving a second thought. But the moment you stepped inside, the air felt different. It was cold, no matter the season, and the silence was heavy. Not peaceful, but oppressive, like it was weighing down on you. There were little things too that added to the unease. The lights would flicker sometimes, even though my dad checked the wiring and found nothing wrong. Doors would creak open or shut on their own, and we'd hear faint thuds coming from the attic, even though it was empty. It was like the house itself was alive, breathing and shifting around us. One day, while cleaning the living room, I found an old photo tucked behind a vent. It showed a family, a man, a woman, and a little girl. They looked happy enough, but there was something off about their eyes. They seemed too intense, almost like they were staring right through you. I put the photo back where I found it and tried to forget about it, but it lingered in my mind. Who were they? Had they lived here before us? And why did their picture feel so wrong? Another time, my mom tried to bring some life into the house by putting up cheerful decorations and playing music. It helped a little during the day, but at night, it felt like the house pushed back. The footsteps got louder, the whispers more insistent. It was as if whatever was there didn't want us to feel at home. By the time we moved out, I was more than ready to leave. Packing up felt like shedding a heavy coat I'd been forced to wear for far too long. As we drove away, I didn't look back. I didn't want to. Some places are better left behind, and that house is one of them. Last year, my family and I moved into a cozy house in a small town. It seemed like a perfect spot, quiet with a nice yard and friendly neighbors. When we first arrived, we learned that the previous owner, an elderly woman, had passed away in the house. We also heard that her husband might have too. At first, it was just an interesting bit of trivia, something to talk about. But now it feels like more than just a story. The oddities started small, almost subtle. Little things like soft noises in the middle of the night or objects falling off shelves with no apparent reason. We'd laugh it off, chalking it up to the house settling or the wind rattling the windows. But then, things escalated. It wasn't just sounds or things moving anymore. We started seeing things. Real, undeniable things. The first time I saw something, it was late, around 2 a.m. I had gotten up to use the bathroom. Half asleep, I shuffled out of my room, and as I passed the hallway, I saw someone walking into the kitchen. I remember calling out a quick, "Hello," assuming it was one of my parents. But there was no response. That woke me up a bit more, so I walked into the kitchen, expecting to see someone there. It was completely empty. No one was there. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. After all, it was late, and my eyes were still adjusting to the dim light. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. Fast forward to today. This morning started out normal enough. I woke up, groggy and dragging myself out of bed, ready to start the day. The house felt quiet, which wasn't unusual. I thought maybe my parents had gone out for errands. Still half asleep, I went to the kitchen to grab my medicine. I'm terrible at taking pills. It always takes me a few tries, so I was standing there staring out the window as I worked up the nerve to swallow it. That's when I saw it again. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a dark figure moving behind me, heading toward the hallway. Instinctively, I said hi, thinking it was my dad, but there was no reply. I turned around, feeling uneasy, and saw nothing. The hallway was empty. Still, I thought maybe I'd missed him, so after finishing with my pill, I walked through the house, checking every room. Not a single person was there. That's when it hit me. The cars were gone. I ran outside to confirm it, and sure enough, the driveway was empty. I was home alone. Panic set in. I grabbed my phone and called my dad, rambling about what had just happened. He listened patiently, and then he said something that sent chills down my spine. "You saw it too?" He explained that he'd also seen a shadowy figure walking through the house before. He tried to reassure me, saying it was probably a friendly spirit. But honestly, knowing he'd seen the same thing didn't make me feel any better. It just confirmed that I wasn't imagining things. I tried to shake it off and settled on the couch with one of our dogs beside me. The other dog was nowhere to be seen, so I called for her, thinking maybe she was in another room. That's when I heard it. A faint sound, like a single footstep, coming from the end of the hallway. I froze. From where I was sitting, I couldn't see down the hallway, but the sound was unmistakable. My heart started racing. I called for my other dog again, hoping she'd come running and prove it was just her. But then I realized she was already lying next to me, looking just as alert and confused as I felt. Before I could process what was happening, I heard rapid footsteps, like someone running down the hallway. It was loud, deliberate, and definitely not the kind of sound an old house makes on its own. My dog's ears perked up and she stared toward the hallway, but she didn't move. Neither did I. We both just sat there, frozen, listening as the footsteps faded into silence. That was the moment I knew, without a doubt, that we weren't alone in this house. Over the past few months, there'd been too many things to ignore. The noises, the objects falling, the shadowy figure. It all pointed to one thing, a spirit. And not just any spirit, but one that seemed powerful enough to make itself seen, heard, and felt. The question now is what to do about it. Part of me wants to make contact to try and understand who or what this spirit is and why it's still here. But another part of me is scared to provoke it. What if it's not as friendly as my dad thinks? For now, I'm trying to coexist with it. I've started paying closer attention to when and where things happen, hoping to find some sort of pattern. Maybe it's tied to a specific room or a certain time of day. Maybe it's trying to tell us something. Living with a spirit isn't exactly what I signed up for when we moved here, but it's become our new normal. Every creak of the floor, every flicker of light, every sudden movement out of the corner of my eye keeps me on edge. But at the same time, it's kind of fascinating. This house has history, and now we're part of it. Whatever happens next, one thing is clear. This is more than just a house. It's a place where the past and present seem to coexist, and every day brings a new reminder of that.